The night Daniel Carter packed his bags, it was raining. Not the soft kind of rain that makes you want to sit by the window with coffee and think about nothing in particular. The hard, relentless kind that hammers against glass and finds every gap in every doorframe and reminds you that the world outside does not care what you are going through. He had his duffel bag open on the bed, his truck keys in his hand, and on his phone, a one-way bus ticket to Phoenix, Arizona, where his old college friend had a construction company, a spare room, and a life that looked nothing like the wreckage Daniel was currently standing inside of. He was 34 years old. The apartment was in Columbus, Ohio. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and dish soap, and a stack of unopened bills on the counter that he had stopped looking at, because looking at them made the tightness in his chest worse. His daughter Sophie was 6 years old and sleeping in the next room. His son Ethan was 4, curled up in his little bed with his arm wrapped around a stuffed dog he called Captain, a name he had chosen himself with complete seriousness one afternoon and never questioned since. Their mother, Megan, had walked out 9 weeks ago. No discussion, no plan. One bag, one sentence. "I can't keep doing this, Daniel. I'm sorry." And then the sound of the door closing. And then the silence that comes after a door closes and you understand that it is not going to open again. She had called twice in the first month. The kids heard her voice through the phone, and Sophie had pressed it against her ear, with both hands like she was trying to climb through it. After the second call, there was nothing. No texts, no updates, just absence, settling into the apartment like a permanent weather condition. Daniel stood in the bedroom with the rain outside and the keys in his hand and thought about Phoenix. He let himself think about it fully, without flinching. The warm air, the open highways, the feeling of being somewhere that did not know his name or his failures, or the specific weight of everything he had let fall apart. He thought about waking up in the morning and having his first cup of coffee in peace. He thought about what it would feel like to be accountable only to himself, to make decisions based on what he wanted rather than what 2 small children needed, to simply exist for a while, without the constant low hum of responsibility pressing down on every hour of every day. He thought about all of it. He gave it a full and honest accounting. And then Ethan coughed from the next room, small and brief, the unconscious cough of a sleeping child shifting in the dark. Daniel heard it, and something inside him went completely still, the way a river goes still right before it changes direction. He stood there. He looked at the duffel bag. He looked at the keys in his hand, and something in him that had no name and needed no argument simply said no. Not like a command, more like a recognition, like he had asked himself. A question he already knew the answer to, and the answer had finally arrived in a language he could not argue with. He set the keys on the dresser. He sat on the edge of the bed. He sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain, listening to his children breathe through the wall, and he made a decision that had no logical reward attached to it. No guarantee, no applause waiting on the other side. He made it because the alternative, walking out that door, starting that engine, leaving those 2 kids to wake up in the morning and find another parent gone, was something he could not do and still recognize himself in the mirror. He unzipped the duffel bag and put everything back, slowly, like he was sealing something. The first year was the kind of difficult that does not photograph well and does not make for easy conversation. It was the alarm going off at 5 in the morning so he could shower before the kids woke up. It was figuring out that Sophie needed 2 braids, not 1, because 1 made her look like a baby, and she had very strong feelings about not looking like a baby. It was Ethan going through 6 weeks of eating nothing that wasn't yellow: corn, banana, mac and cheese, scrambled eggs, which made grocery, shopping and exercise in patience and improvisation. It was sitting in small plastic chairs at parent-teacher conferences across from women who looked at him with that particular mixture of sympathy and mild surprise that told him they had not expected a father to show up alone and know the details. He was working at a lumber yard 5 days a week and picking up shifts at a hardware store on weekends. His back ached by Thursday every week and by Sunday. It was a different kind of pain entirely. The deep structural kind that comes from not enough sleep and too much lifting in a body, being asked to perform at a level that assumes someone is helping share the load. There was no social life. There were no evenings off. There was no version of his week that included anything for Daniel Carter except work. Children, and the brief corridor of silence between putting the kids to bed and falling asleep. Himself on the couch with the television on. His mother called from Tulsa every Sunday evening without exception. She offered to come and stay for a while. He told her he had it handled. He didn't have it handled in any comfortable sense of the word, but he was upright and moving forward, and the kids were fed and clean and getting to school on time. And in that season of his life, he had decided that those facts were enough of a foundation to stand on. He didn't want anyone else's hands on the thing he was building, not yet. What he noticed, and it was the thing that kept him moving when nothing else was giving him a reason to, was how his kids were adapting. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but they were doing it. Sophie, at 6 years old, had appointed herself the official table setter and took the job with an intensity that would have been funny if it hadn't also been quietly heartbreaking. This little girl creating structure for herself in the only way she knew how. Ethan processed everything through drawing, filling pages with crayon worlds that Daniel studied carefully, because he had learned that what the boy drew was usually a more accurate report of his inner life than anything he said out loud. These two children were not falling apart. They were finding their footing. And Daniel understood, in a way he felt more than thought, that the reason they were finding it was because the ground beneath them was staying solid, because every morning he was still there. That was what he was giving them that nothing else could replace. Not money, not programs, not good intentions from people on the outside, just his continued, daily, unspectacular presence. Just the fact of him still being there when they woke up. The second year softened slightly at the edges. Nothing dramatic shifted, but a rhythm established itself, the way rivers eventually carve a path even through hard ground. He knew which nights needed extra patience and which nights the kids could handle a frozen dinner and an early bedtime without it meaning anything. He knew that when Sophie got quiet in a particular way, she needed to be held without being asked if she was okay, because being asked made her retreat. He knew that Ethan's drawings turned dark when something was bothering him, and that the right response was to sit near him with a snack and wait without pressure until the words came on their own. He was becoming, without planning it, someone who knew his children completely, and that knowledge was not transferable. It could not be inherited or approximated. It had been built one day, at a time, out of the raw material of showing up when it was inconvenient, paying attention when he was exhausted, and staying present when everything in him wanted distance. There was a February night in that second year that he did not forget. 2 a.m, Sophie appeared in his doorway in her white pajamas, crying without sound the way children cry when grief moves through them in the dark and their daytime defenses are too tired to hold it back. He brought her into his lap and she pressed her face into his chest and cried for a long time and then said, so quietly he almost missed it, "Is Mommy coming back, Daddy?" He held her tighter. He thought about the comfortable answer, the gentle, vague one that protects a child from a truth they might not be ready for. And then he decided that Sophie had already survived enough dishonesty from the world, and she deserved something real, delivered with enough steadiness that it could be held without breaking her. "I honestly don't know, baby," he said. "But I know that I'm not going anywhere. I am right here. I'm going to be right here." She cried a little more, and then sleep took her back. He carried her to her bed and stood in the doorway of her room for a long time. Afterward, watching her chest rise and fall in the nightlight glow, and something inside him settled. Permanently that night. Some argument he had been quietly having with himself since the beginning finally went quiet. He was not staying because leaving was impossible. He was staying because these two children were the best and most real thing he had ever been part of, and abandoning that would have cost him something he could never have bought back. By the time Sophie was 10 and Ethan was 8, people around them knew Daniel Carter the way communities come to know someone whose consistency has outlasted every expectation. He was the father who was always at pickup, always knew the right snack for the right event, always remembered the names of his kids, friends, and the small details of their lives from one conversation to the next. Other children gravitated toward him naturally, the way children gravitate toward adults who are calm and paying genuine attention, because steadiness in a grown-up is something kids recognize and trust even when they cannot explain why. He met Claire at Ethan's soccer game on a Saturday afternoon in October. She was there watching her nephew play, standing on the sideline with her arms crossed against the autumn chill, and she laughed at something one of the kids did on the field, a real laugh, unguarded and bright, and Daniel looked over and then had some difficulty looking away. They talked for almost an hour while the game moved around them. She asked about his kids with genuine interest and remembered details he mentioned early and connected them to things, he said 20 minutes later, which told him she was actually listening and not just being polite. He drove home that evening, thinking about her in a way he had not thought about anyone in years, with a feeling that was partly warmth and partly something that scared him a little, because it had been so long since he had felt it. They moved slowly, more slowly than either of them wanted to, probably. But Daniel had learned something in the years behind him about the cost of decisions made without enough thought, and he was not going to bring someone into his children's lives without being completely sure of what he was doing. Claire not only accepted this, she understood it in a way that required no explanation. She said one evening, simply and directly, that she did not see his devotion to Sophie and Ethan as something she needed to compete with. She saw it as a sign of who he was. Daniel looked at her when she said that and recognized something he had almost stopped believing he would find again. On the morning of Sophie's high school graduation, Daniel Carter sat in the bleachers of the gymnasium at Westland High in Columbus, Ohio, with Ethan on his left and Claire on his right, and he watched his daughter walk across that stage in a blue cap and gown with her head up, and her name called clearly into the air of that gymnasium. And something happened in his chest that he did not have a single word for. It was pride, but larger than pride. It was relief, but older than relief. It was the feeling of a man who had stood in a rain-soaked bedroom 11 years ago with a packed bag and keys in his hand, and had chosen the road that offered nothing easy, and had walked every mile of it in work boots and exhaustion and love, and was now sitting in a gymnasium watching what that walk had made. Sophie found him in the crowd outside afterward. She was holding her diploma, and her eyes were full, and she moved through the noise and the families and the chaos of that afternoon, and when she reached him, she did not say anything right away. She just put her arms around him and held on, the way she used to at 6 years old in the dark of a February night, when the world was too heavy, and his presence was the only thing that made it bearable. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, her voice quiet against his shoulder. "For staying. For always staying, Daniel." Carter held his daughter in the middle of that crowd, and he did not try to stop what came. Some things are too large and too hard won to be contained, and this was one of them. 11 years ago, he had made a decision in a moment, when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed and every easy option was pointing toward the door. He had put the keys down. He had unpacked the bag. He had stayed, and standing there in the afternoon sun with Sophie in his arms and Ethan beside him and Claire nearby with tears on her face and a smile she wasn't trying to hide, Daniel understood something with a completeness he had never felt before. He had thought, on that rainy night 11 years ago, that he was choosing his kids over his own life. But that was not what had happened. What had happened was that he had chosen his kids, and in doing so, without planning it, without knowing it, without any promise that it would work out this way, he had chosen the very best version of himself. He had chosen the life that was actually worth living. He had chosen to stay, and everything, every single thing, had changed because of it.